Okay. Have you ever like thought through something where like, one decision totally depends on what happens with the first decision you make?
Yeah. Like, think about it for a sec.
Like, I'm not even going to think about option B until I know like what's going on with option A.
Right.
That kind of thinking is like stuff we do all the time, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Today, we're going to look at how that works in code
Okay.
with this thing called nested conditionals.
That's right. And, thinking about that in your own life, have you ever had to, like, make a decision where, like, your first answer led to a bunch more questions for you?
Oh, yeah.
That's kind of the core idea that we're talking about today.
That's awesome.
One decision leading us deeper into more choices.
That's really cool. And, to help us kind of navigate this stuff, because it can get a little complicated, right?
Yeah, it can.
We're going to turn to a YouTube channel called Code Curious.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It's really good. They have a great explanation of this
Yeah?
by Bradley Bearden
Uh-huh.
from Dadeville High School in Alabama. Yeah, he's great.
And the videos we're looking at specifically are called CSP371 Nested Conditionals
Okay.
and CSP372 Nested Conditionals.
Gotcha.
And so our goal for you in this deep dive is to really like nail down what these things are all about.
Yes.
Not just the definition, but like how do they actually work and why is it so useful to understand them?
Exactly.
And we're going to use all the explanations and examples from those videos.
Yeah, a good idea.
It's like right off the bat for you. What does it even mean when we say nested conditionals? What are we talking about here?
Basically, a nested conditional is a conditional statement that's inside of another conditional statement.
Okay.
It's like a rule that only gets checked if another rule has already been followed.
Right. I like that one set of rules depending on another set of rules.
Right.
Now, in the first video, he uses a flowchart to illustrate this.
Yeah.
How does that help us visualize it?
So, like, think about you're at a fork in the road, right?
Right.
Depending on which path you choose, you might hit another fork in the road.
And then you have to evaluate that condition before you get to the final destination.
So it's like, if it's cold outside,
Right.
then check and see if I have a coat.
Exactly.
And if I don't have a coat, then I do this. But if it's not cold outside, I don't even need to think about a coat.
It's like a step-by-step evaluation.
That makes it much more clear.
Where like the next steps only matter based on what happened in the previous steps.
Gotcha. Now, these videos also show you some pseudocode, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So you see these if-else structures, and sometimes a whole block of code is like sitting inside the else part of another if-else, or sometimes it's in the if part.
You got it.
But these textual examples can really help make it more concrete.
For sure.
Right now, the first video, he goes through a bunch of different scenarios.
Yeah.
And like the first one he does is with these 3 variables
Okay.
called time score and lives.
Gotcha.
And so imagine you see this, time is 4.5, score is 1200, and lives are at 5.
Okay, I gotcha.
What happens next?
So the first condition that it checks is if time is less than 3 and score is greater than 1,000.
Okay, so let's think about that.
All right.
Is 4.5 less than 3?
No.
No, it's not. Is 1200 greater than 1000?
Yes.
It is.
Yes.
But because it's an and statement,
Right.
both of those have to be true.
Correct.
And since the first one is not true,
Right.
that whole first if condition is false.
You got it.
So what happens then?
So then we skip whatever's inside of that if block and we jump down to the else if condition,
Okay.
which is if time is less than 3 or the score is greater than 1,000.
So now we have the or.
Yes.
So again, 4.5 is not less than 3, so that's false.
Right.
But the score of 1200 is greater than 1000.
That's true.
So that part's true. And if you have an or statement, as long as one of them is true,
Then the whole thing is true.
the whole thing is true.
Exactly.
What happens then?
So then since that else if condition is true, the code inside of it runs. And in this example, it says that lives is going to get updated to 6. So it takes the current number of lives, which is 5, adds 1 to it. And that becomes the new value for lives.
Okay, so the key thing to notice here is because that else, if condition was true, that final else block at the end gets skipped.
Totally.
It's like it found a path that worked, and it doesn't need to bother looking any further.
Yeah, like once a condition is met and the code inside of it runs,
Okay.
the program just moves on and it doesn't even look at the other else if or else options.
That makes sense. And then he goes through another example.
Yeah, okay.
Where time is 3, score is 1000, and lives is still 5.
Right.
And this one shows you how important those little symbols can be.
Oh yeah, those less than versus less than or equal to,
Right.
or greater than versus greater than or equal to, those are huge.
Yeah, they can make a big difference. So in this case, when we evaluate that first if condition,
Okay.
if time is less than 3 and score is greater than 1000,
Yeah.
both parts are false.
Uh-huh.
because time is 3, which is not less than 3.
It's equal to it.
Right, and the score is 1,000, which is not greater than 1,000.
Right.
So that whole and condition is false.
Exactly.
What happens next?
So then we go on to the else-if statement.
Okay.
If time is less than 3 or score is greater than 1,000.
And again, for the same reasons, neither part is true.
Right.
3 is not less than 3, and 1,000 is not greater than 1,000.
Yep.
So now what?
So both the if and the else-if conditions are false.
Okay.
So we finally get to that last else block.
Okay.
And here it says lives is going to be updated to 4.
Okay.
So this just goes to show how those tiny little differences in the comparison symbols really make a difference in how the program runs.
Yeah, they can totally change the paths the code takes.
For sure.
And then to like illustrate this further, he moves to this ice cream cost pseudocode example,
Right, that was a good one.
which was a great way to see nested conditionals in like a different kind of context.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So the initial cost is set at 450.
Okay.
And the first condition it checks is if waffle cone is true. If it is, then inside of that there's another if-else that checks to see if it includes toppings. So the decision about toppings depends on what kind of cone you chose.
Yeah, it's like a hierarchy.
Exactly. So the first scenario, waffle cone is true,
Okay.
but includes toppings is false. So because waffle cone is true, we go inside that first if block,
Yeah.
and then we hit that nested if-else for the toppings.
Okay.
And since includes toppings is false,
Right.
we skip over the if part and go to the else,
Uh-huh.
which adds 100 to the cost, making it 550.
You got it.
But here's where it gets interesting. In the second scenario, waffle cone is false, but includes toppings is true.
Okay.
Because that very first if condition, that waffle cone is true, is false.
Right.
The entire block of code that's nested inside of it, including the whole if-else about toppings, is skipped.
That's right. The topping question never even gets asked.
Right, because you didn't want a waffle cone.
Exactly.
So it just stays at that initial 450.
Yep.
So that outer condition is like a gatekeeper.
That's a great way to put it.
It controls whether those inner conditions even get evaluated.
Exactly.
And you can really see how these nested conditionals let us, like, prioritize those conditions.
It allows for a much more complex decision-making process.
Now, the second video, CSP372,
Yeah.
focuses on actually like writing these nested conditionals.
Okay.
And he kicks it off with this scenario about salary changes
Right.
based on whether someone is certified or not and how much experience they have.
Gotcha.
So the main condition for a salary increase is whether or not the worker is certified.
Okay.
And if they're not, the base salary stays at $35,000.
Right.
So this is our main outer conditional.
With the first question we got asked.
Are they certified? And if the answer is no, then that's it.
Yeah, we're done with the decision process there.
Right, but if they are certified,
Yeah.
then we got to dig a little deeper. And we got to see how much experience they have.
Right.
And so for certified people, how long they've been working, less than 10 years or 10 years or more, will determine how big their raise is.
Exactly.
So either their salary is going to go to $45,000 or $50,000.
You got it.
So this is our nested conditional.
It's a decision inside of a decision.
And he shows you a flow chart for this as well,
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
which makes it so clear. You follow the certified branch, and then that splits into 2 more branches based on their experience.
Yeah, it's like a decision tree.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then he translates that into pseudocode.
Okay.
So you see how they set up those variables. It's certified as a Boolean, so it's either true or false.
Right.
And then years experience is an integer, so it's a whole number.
Okay.
And then they set the starting salary at $35,000.
All right.
Now, one thing that I thought was interesting here is there's no else for that initial if.
Oh, yeah. Why is that?
What do you think that is?
So the base salary of $35,000 is already established. So if they're not certified, the code in the if block just doesn't run,
Okay,
and their salary just stays at $35,000.
gotcha.
So it's like the else scenario is already handled just by how we set up the salary in the beginning.
That's a really efficient way to do it.
For sure.
So then if they are certified,
Right.
we move inside that if block.
Okay.
And that's where we see that nested if-else that checks their years of experience.
Uh-huh.
So if it's less than 10 years,
Yep.
we add 10,000 to their salary.
Okay.
Otherwise, meaning they have 10 years of experience or more,
Right.
we add 15,000.
Gotcha.
And so this structure makes sure that the salary increase is only figured out for people who are already certified,
Yeah. It only applies if they pass that first test.
right? Keeps everything nice and focused.
Exactly.
Now, he also goes through another example
Okay.
about quiz grades, which is a really good way to see how to structure nested conditionals to be like really efficient.
Oh, yeah. And avoid repeating a bunch of stuff.
Exactly.
I like that.
So like the first condition it checks is if the grade is 90 or above.
Okay.
And if it is, it prints out this message that says awesome grade, no makeup, right?
But if that's not true,
Meaning the grade is below 90?
right, then we go into the else block.
Uh-huh.
And that's where the nesting happens.
Okay.
So inside that else block, the first nested if checks to see if the grade is 70 or above.
Right.
And remember, we already know that it's less than 90.
Yeah, because that first if condition failed.
Exactly. And if it's 70 or above,
Right.
it prints out a specific message.
Okay.
And then the last else inside of that nested block is for when the grade is below 70.
Gotcha.
What's really cool here is inside that nested if,
Uh-huh.
you don't have to explicitly say if the grade is less than 90.
You're right, you don't.
Because we only got to that nested if the first condition failed.
Exactly.
So we already know it's got to be less than 90.
The structure just implies that.
And this just shows you how nested conditionals can help you narrow down the possibilities as you go
Uh-huh.
and avoid checking the same thing over and over.
Right. Makes the code a lot cleaner.
Exactly. So as we've gone through this, what are some of the big takeaways for you? All right, so number one is the basic definition.
Okay.
Nested conditionals are just conditionals inside of other conditionals.
Yeah.
And it's just a way to handle making decisions when there are multiple layers of things to check.
Okay. And another thing that's super important
Yeah.
is you got to really carefully think about each condition and how the logic works, especially when you're dealing with ands and ors.
Yeah, think of them like gatekeepers, controlling which parts of the code actually run.
And that first video really stressed this,
Yeah.
that being able to follow that pseudocode and see what the end result is going to be
Right.
is a really important skill to have.
You got to be able to see all those different paths in your head.
Yeah. And then that second video showed us that sometimes you're going to have to write code or choose the correct code
Right.
that uses nested conditionals to solve a specific problem.
Exactly.
So knowing how to structure those logically is really important.
It's not just about knowing what they are. It's about being able to use them.
Okay, well, that was a pretty good deep dive, I think,
Yeah,
into nested conditionals,
we covered a lot.
thanks to that great channel, Code Curious.
Yeah, they're awesome.
It seems like this is like a really important concept
Oh, for sure.
for anybody getting into programming,
Absolutely.
but even just for thinking logically through things.
Right, it mirrors how we make decisions in real life a lot of times, where it's like a chain of different conditions that all affect each other.
So as you go about your day now,
Yeah.
where do you think you might see this kind of nested logic playing out in the decisions that you make?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Like maybe in ways that you haven't thought about before?
Yeah.
Like deciding what to wear based on the weather and what you're going to be doing that day.
Right.
Or like the best way to get somewhere, depending on the traffic and the time of day.
That's a good point.
Seems like it's all over the place.
It really shows you how the stuff we're talking about in programming applies to how we solve problems in the real world.
Yeah, and make decisions.
For sure.
Well, this has been a great deep dive for you.
Yeah.
We really encourage you to go back and look at those Code Curious videos
Yeah.
and think about how you can use this new understanding, whether it's into coding or just getting a better handle on complicated situations.
Totally.
Thanks for joining us.
Good to be here.
We'll see you next time.
See ya.